Welcome to the podcast. Hannah, I would love if you could just start off by giving the audience a little bit of background, like an intro into you. So before we get into all of your tax expertise, tell us a little bit about who you are.
Sure. Thanks, Haley. I have been a painter since I went to art school and I graduated from my MFA program in 2005. So that is 20 years now. But I started my company, Sunlight Tax, because I felt so frustrated as a professional full-time artist trying to get tax help. I just found that, when I sat down with my dad's accountant, he treated me like some kind of dilettante. And I was like, no, I'm making money from this. I don't deserve to be treated like I'm not a worthy client. I'm paying your full fee and
Right.
like, let's get the info. So, yeah, that's the origin story to how I started this business. Although there's a lot of like cosmically, it means God has a sense of humor because the fact that I, as a painter, then went back to study taxes is so funny.
I mean, I'm sure we didn't expect that, but no, I love it. And I relate to your story so much in that we're not the typical client for these people. And therefore, I think a lot of the times we're overlooked. Or I talk to so many artists and they're like, I just don't know like who to go to, where to begin. I
Hmm.
don't want to, you Google like taxes and you get sent to some huge like, corporation and they're like, how do I just figure out what's right for me? And I think that's what
Yeah.
you're really doing, which obviously is so helpful. But tell everyone a little bit about Sunlight Tax. So you developed it. How
Sure.
is it specifically designed for artists, creatives, self-employed, and how's it kind of different than the traditional tax services?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think I built it from a place of wanting creative people to feel valued. Like my goal first and foremost is like when you come, even hearing the name Sunlight Tax, I just want you to feel like welcome and like, oh, you're worthy and you deserve this. My goal is to just give really clear, practical, simple tax education to people because we all need to do our taxes, right? I think also there's some really unhealthy attitudes about money sometimes floating around in the art world, especially. I just want to make sure that artists really feel like, no, no, you really do deserve to get everything that the tax code is meant to give you. And there are a lot of benefits when you realize that the tax code sees you as a business when you're self-employed. You don't need to do anything more official than just make self-employment income. And so, just like a lot of myth busting, a lot of debunking, and a lot of just basic education. You're not broken, you're not behind. A lot of my clients feel like they're the only one who doesn't know this stuff, and it's not true at all. Like, there's no tax education in the US, which is bananas.
Mhm.
But you're not behind. Like, nobody knows this stuff. Financial illiteracy, tax illiteracy is rampant. And so, it's just a thing you have to learn. And once you learn it, then you know and you can be empowered. So,
Yeah, I mean, I remember the first time doing my taxes as a self-employed individual. Tears were
mhm.
shed. And like I won't say
No,
that they're not still shed, but like we are
found a better place. I think also it's overwhelming. Like, here's the thing, taxes happen every year, right? So, like, my mantra for you is, don't perfection is impossible. You
Mhm.
will never achieve it, right? But improvement is totally possible, and meeting deadlines is also possible. So, just try to get a little better each year. And if that's your goal, one, you'll make it. And two, you actually will get quite good at this stuff over time. So, it just follows the like regular path of human learning a little more humanely. And I think a humane approach is kind of what I'm all about.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, can we start with just talking about the different resources you have for artists? I know you have free guides, you have books, you have all kinds of different stuff for artists listening. They're like, wow, that sounds great. But like, what does it look like to kind of learn from you? Can you kind of just like run us through those?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, my website, sunlighttax.com, that is kind of where you can find all this stuff.
Mhm.
But I have a podcast called the Sunlight Tax Podcast, and I just try to keep the episodes short, like 20 to 30 minutes, and just break down one concept per episode. So the cool thing there is that you can look in the archive and you can find, oh, there's like 3 episodes about LLCs. There's these episodes about estimated quarterly taxes. If you want to just do a little search through the podcast, the Sunlight Tax podcast archive, it answers a lot of questions. Second, I have a free visual guide to tax deductions. One of the benefits of being an artist and an accountant is getting both sides of that right. If you're listening on the podcast, I'm showing a visual of this guide right now, but basically it's like a translation tool because I think in the arts, we often use our own special language. We often don't use the language of like a car mechanic or a beauty salon or another kind of business.
Right.
And so I write what you would spend, what you're spending money on in your business and what you call it. And then I just kind of link it visually to what the IRS calls it and exactly where it goes on your Schedule C, which is the form you fill out for your small business self-employed income. It's also got stuff about the little detail-y things like taking a home office or home studio deduction, mileage, business meals. There are some things that are a little complicated and a little more than just a receipt. And so I've got that all broken out as well on this guide. So that is a really useful free tool available at my website. There's 9 different versions for different types of creative people. So there's one
I
for
love that.
artists, one for designers, one for makers. So you can kind of pick what feel, and you can download all 9 if you really want to.
I mean, they're
Um,
very, I will say, when I was first looking at your website and for the artists listening or the creatives listening, it's one, very visually attractive. So I was like, need that free download. But
Thanks.
also, it's really helpful because that's something I run into. And I've been running my business for 7 years now, or this will be my 7th year, I guess, doing the tax thing. And sometimes the way I, write something down as an expense, like art supplies, that is not a line item on a Schedule C. So understanding where does that fall in like IRS language, I will
Mhm.
be using something like this because it's hard. It's not like, oh, well, is that like an office? Like how do they, what language do they use? And so that's something I think right off the bat that's probably going to be really useful for artists.
Super useful, especially because now I think you, Haley, and the artists that you serve tend to operate in the part of the art world that's a little more geared towards making sales. And like, I think your clients probably think of themselves as business mostly. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I think so.
But there's also, I'm from the part of the art world that's even more geared towards like museums and critics. And there are a lot of people operating in that part of the art world who really are 3 steps back from running a business. Though they are running a business, they really don't act like it or think about it that way.
Hmm.
And even though they do things that indirectly absolutely raise the prices of their artwork and gain critical reputation, it's not very straightforward. So I
Yeah.
think it can be very difficult for an accountant to kind of get that if they don't know the art world and a variety of artists and what it can look like. If you're making like highly conceptual video pieces that are not saleable,
Hmm.
then an accountant can be like, is this a hobby? But
Right.
if you are showing them in the Metropolitan Museum of Art and getting huge grants, like, no, there's like actually a distinct profit motive behind doing work like that, but it's about pushing hard on the critic lever, getting a critical reputation. And
Hmm.
that actually does increase your prices and help your business. But
Right.
it's just like you kind of have to know how the art world is to know that
Exactly.
stuff.
Yeah, but that's the way you break it down is so helpful. I think something that would be really useful, I'm just going to throw this out there on this podcast, is to
Yeah,
almost break down like what are the baseline terms and things you need to understand as an artist going into tax season because that's where we are now. And we can kind of
I
run through
love
these
it.
together. Schedule C. You said that and people are probably like, "What?" Can we kind of run through like 1099 from a gallery, Schedule C, like maybe just a couple of basic terms and like how we should think about them?
Oh, I love this. Let's do that. So, a Schedule C, let's do that one right up front. Pretty much everyone listening to this podcast, if you are running an art business, you most likely have a Schedule C. Schedule C is the default place on your tax return where you put your income from your creative practice, your art business, and it's also where you put your business deductions. And so if you think about the math equation that the Schedule C sets up, you list your income, all of the income that you bring in, and all the tax deductible business deductions, and you do the math to subtract those. So what you're taxed on is actually just the difference. You're only paying taxes on your profit from that art business. That's the cool thing about the Schedule C. The other thing to understand about the Schedule C is that by default, it means you are actually seen as a business and given all the benefits of a business in US tax law, but it also means you're self employed. So a Schedule C is also where self employment tax is calculated. So that profit that you have in your business, one of the biggest mistakes that artists make is they underestimate their tax bill because all they think about is the federal income tax and maybe also state income tax, but you have a whole third layer of taxes, which is Medicare and Social Security. And that is it's actually, you're paying it sort of on two sides when you're self-employed. If you were an employee, your paychecks will be subject to Medicare and Social Security withholding. That will come out of your pay. 7.65% of every check you earned will go into that. But your boss, invisible to you, your boss would be paying a mirror image amount of 7.65% into your Medicare and Social Security. Well, when you're self-employed, this is the thing. You're also the boss. So
Yep.
you actually are paying both parts of Medicare and Social Security. And, people look at that and they're like, oh my gosh, 15.3% of my profit I pay in self-employment tax. Yes, but who else would do it? Like you actually are the boss. That's
Right.
real.
And it's theoretically going towards like your
It
future.
absolutely is. You have a right to be taking Social Security because of that. And Medicare. Those are great things. Those are protections. They're not handouts. You have been paying 15.3% of
Right.
your profit every single year. And so
And
you
it's
are,
not optional, so you have to pay
it's not
it.
exactly. You're very much entitled to use that money on the other side. That's the deal.
Yeah, I remember the first time I got hit with that, and I was like,
Hmm.
"Oh my gosh, I have so much money," which is, I think, important for artists to know. Like, know
Yeah.
what you're gonna owe. So now I know kind of like what to put aside every month because that's hard to
Hmm.
do when it's not being withheld by an employer. But
Yes.
also understanding, I think what was helpful for me is actually understanding why the money is being taken out. And I know that's nitty gritty, but I do think it's helpful to know, like, okay, this is federal, this is state, this is, and like
Hmm.
why that money is being taken out. I know everyone doesn't need to get to that level, but that was helpful for me to understand, okay, where is this going? Okay, it's going towards, Social Security, Medicare. That like makes sense. There isn't someone else putting that away for me. Like it started to click in my head, which I just found really
Yeah.
helpful.
Well, I feel like my brain works the same way as yours, Haley, because I feel like understanding the why makes it feel like, oh, okay, I'm cool with that. Like, I get that. That does
Yeah.
make sense. It does feel fair. I pay into Social Security, I pay into Medicare, and that's why I get to take them out again at
Yeah.
the other end of my career. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
cool.
So that definitely
Um,
makes sense. And then another question a lot of artists ask me is because a lot of the artists I work with, sell art on their own, sell art through galleries, stores, whatever, and
yeah.
they'll get like a 1099 W-9 situation. Like they'll be asked to fill out the form, they'll get money at the end of the year, and they're like, oh my gosh, what is this? Like, I don't know what this is. Quickly break that down.
Yeah, absolutely. So 1099s are reporting for income that is received not as an employee.
Mhm.
So FYI, if you have a day job, if you are an employee, you'll get a tax form called a W-2. When you're self-employed, if someone else paid you, then they may be required to issue you a 1099. Typically, that's going to be a 1099 NEC for non-employee compensation. You might also be getting another kind of 1099. There's a whole bunch of kinds of 1099s, but the other one that you're most likely to get as an artist is called a 1099K. And that is one you get from a third-party payment processor. So if you're an artist who sells on Etsy, sells on Artsy or some other platform like that, or if you make sales with a payment processor like Stripe or PayPal Business, something like that, then you will get a 1099K. Super important thing for everybody to know. I have a couple of like common misconceptions about 1099s, especially for artists. The law is super clear that all of your art income you have to report. So you have to report it on your Schedule C and pay taxes on it. Yes, you still get business deductions, so you can lower the amount you're actually paying taxes on very dramatically, which is great. But a lot of people, and I don't know if it's like a little bit of self-serving ignorance, but a lot of people sort of lean on an idea that if they don't get a 1099 that they don't have to report that income, and that is false. You do. So
Yeah.
if it's your art income, if it is income you made as a self-employed person, you have to report it on your Schedule C, even if you don't get a 1099. Reasons you might not get a 1099 are because you made less than the filing threshold for 1099s. So that could be under $600 if a person paid you. It could be if you made less than $20,000 in sales from a third-party payment processor. Under the new tax law, they bumped the threshold for that back up to an old limit of $20,000 and 200 transactions. Some of you may be hitting that, and congrats, but some of you may make only $10,000 in sales or have less than 200 transactions. You might not get a 1099K, but if you made sales through Venmo or PayPal, yes, absolutely, you still have to report that income. Super important. And then the last thing I want to clarify is that galleries don't always send you a 1099, and that's not always wrong. Galleries are actually not required to send you a 1099 because to the gallery, your work is merchandise and there is
Oh,
an exception. You don't have to issue 1099s for sales of merchandise. So, like the corner store near you is selling a bunch of Coca-Cola, right? They don't issue 1099s to Coca-Cola. They're just selling their inventory. So
right.
to your gallery, that's what your art is. But does that mean that you have to report your sales of art income? Yeah, for sure. You need
That's
to be tracking it.
interesting. So, because I run an art gallery as well, and I typically issue 1099s for everyone's sake, but I do only issue them if it's over that threshold. And so there are some
Mhm.
artists who are like, hey, I didn't get one. And I always can say, like, this is how much. But I always tell people it's really important to keep track of it yourself too. The
Yes,
1099 is, in my opinion, a great check mark. Like, okay, my what I thought I made from this gallery matches what they say I made, but you don't want to rely on receiving 1099s because like you said, you have to report your income and you don't always receive them in all these different scenarios.
absolutely. And Haley, I mean, I'm sure that you're doing it as correctly as you can, but is it possible that you've ever made a mistake when issuing a 1099?
Oh, I'm
Yeah, I
sure.
mean,
Yeah, I'm a
you're a
one
person.
one person, one woman show over here. Like, let's really
Right.
hope we haven't, but like, let's be real.
Yeah, I will say this, having done many, many, thousands of tax returns, there are mistakes on 1099s all the time. Your records are what save you, so you definitely need those records.
Taxes. This is like different, but for our old house in a different state. So he's been having like another state's stuff withhold. So even like big corporations mess up, you guys.
Yes.
I don't
Yes.
really comprehend what's going on over there, but I know they did something wrong. So if they could do it wrong, single one woman show can also do it wrong. So I think that's important to know.
By the way, 1090, there's been a couple of changes this year in 2025. I'm saying, I know we're speaking, it's 2026, but taxes are retroactive. So when I say 2025, that's the current
Yeah.
tax year because that's the taxes you're working on. But there have been some changes that did affect 2025 1099s. I have a little course on that if anybody's interested. It's at sunlighttax.com/1099. So it's like a 1 hour course and it's less than that actually.
Yeah,
Um,
that's great.
if anybody's interested.
That's amazing. Going off of this, I think a lot of people are probably like, okay, amazing, but how do I keep track of all of this stuff? I mean, some people I think have some loose systems. Some artists I work with, I know, like are deep in the QuickBooks, but can you maybe do a breakdown of, I know you're not big on like rigid systems, but kind of like organizational tools. Like, how do we keep track of this ourselves when, especially as creatives, often we're getting a lot of different paychecks from a gallery, from Stripe, from that store, from that random market? Like, how do you suggest we kind of keep up with this stuff ourselves?
So, yeah, don't feel guilty if you're feeling like it's difficult. But a really simple thing that I want everybody to do who's listening to this is just open a separate bank account for your art business. That is the first and most important step. And the reason that you want to do that is that you want to try to get every transaction to touch that bank account because effectively what that's doing for you is creating a paper trail that becomes the basis for bookkeeping. And so if all of your income from this gallery, this little random commission, this open studios event, this grant is all coming in and getting deposited into that same business bank account, and you're making all your purchases for the business out of that account, then you're creating a record. And now you just have to go pull that month's bank statements or 3 months of bank statements and do your bookkeeping from there. That's what makes it nice and simple. Bookkeeping is a task, it takes time. But that's what's going to make it a lot simpler than like trying to remember where you deposit it, trying to find the proof that it ever happened. Receipts are something you just need for storage. If you are bookkeeping off of receipts, you are doing something that is so much harder than it needs to be. I
Yeah.
recommend bookkeeping off of your bank statement and just receipts. They just go in a file cabinet. You don't have to touch them unless you are audited.
Yes, that makes it so much easier. I'm definitely a
Yeah.
proponent of one account for like one bank account for your business because I know so many artists are like trying to keep up with their receipts and this and that and it's
Hmm.
yes, file them away, but it's so much easier knowing like I can just go to my bank statement every month and say okay, this is from this, and you just all of a sudden have all your income, all your expenses, and you kind of know where you land. I think that's you're working from one piece of paper versus like a thousand little ones and
It's
emails and all
so
the
much.
things.
Also, like a little tip is like a lot of banks will only let you open a business account if you have certain things. Like a bank might require that you have an LLC to open what the bank terms a business account.
Mhm.
I don't even want you to worry about that. LLCs are a thing you can, we can talk about. You can have one. I'm not saying you need it, but you can open just what the bank calls a personal account. The idea is just it's separate and you treat it
Mhm.
as your business account. It doesn't matter that it's what the bank calls a business account. It can just be to
Just
you,
an
your
account,
business
a
account.
checking account.
That's fine. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
I love
fine.
that. That makes it very easy for people too, which I
Yeah.
think is huge. What is your expertise on LLCs versus sole proprietorship? Is that, do you want to dive into that? Because that is
I'm
something I
happy
have no.
to. It's actually like the most frequent question that I get at Sunlight Tax because I think they're really confusing. And also, LLCs are a legal entity, but the funny part is they are not a tax entity. They
Mhm.
actually have completely flexible status and can be any tax status that you want. And I find that a lot of lawyers don't know tax law. And so they don't actually necessarily say accurate things about the accounting side of an LLC. It is confusing because it's where you get two professions bumping up into each other, and maybe the expertise does not go all the way into taxes.
Mhm.
So the LLC is a legal protection. Its job, limited liability company, that's what it stands for, is to limit your liability. So it's, in other words, you should only be forming an LLC if you have liability concerns. It's
Mhm.
about your likelihood of being sued. And that might be a protection you want. I'm not saying don't get it. I'm just saying don't get it if you have no chance of being sued. But an LLC's job is to basically put a shield in between your business bank account and your personal bank account, or all your business assets and all your personal assets. And the reason that's important is that most people's wealth is on the personal side and not actually in the business. So if if you're an artist who has a lot of open studios events and somebody might come into your space and trip and fall and break their wrist, or like you have a heavy sculptures and they could fall on an installer and hurt them, you could be sued. So here's the difference between the sole proprietor and the LLC. The sole proprietor is just a person running, who's self-employed with a business with no separation between their business and their personal. Somebody trips and falls in my studio and they sue me, and I'm a sole proprietor. Well, if I'm found at fault, then that lawsuit the damages can come and they can go not just towards my business account and my business assets, but I can be forced to pay also out of my personal assets. So my home now might be at risk, my retirement savings, my kids' college fund, my car, right? Those are personal things. So the LLC, what's wonderful there is that it stops the lawsuit from touching your personal stuff. So yes, my business assets are still at risk. My business laptop, my business fancy camera, my lighting setup, but most of us don't have that many assets in our business relative
Right.
to our 401k and our house. So that lawsuit would stop at the business assets, and my 401k, my house, my car, those things are untouchable. That's the
Mhm.
benefit.
That makes a lot of
Um,
sense.
yeah. It is really, really important. If you have an LLC, a separate bank account is not just a good idea, it is absolutely mandatory because the LLC's whole basis is that you are separating you, the person, from you, the business. And if you actually don't separate them for real, like you commingle your business and personal accounts, then a court of law can actually subpoena your bank statements. They can discover that. And now actually they can do this thing called piercing the corporate veil. And it means that they actually can invalidate your LLC and essentially take your house, take your car, take your savings. So that little tip about the separate account, it's for
Goes to
everyone, but if
for
you have
everyone.
an LLC, it's definitely don't miss that.
Yeah, if you take nothing from this, make a separate bank account.
Yes. Yes. It's
But
a
then
good idea
also,
for everyone.
I know so many artists that don't have LLCs because, again, you need to think about this for yourself, but most of you are not at the risk of being in a sued situation majority of the time with what you do. But it is important to like
Totally.
talk to your lawyer or whoever to decide if an LLC makes sense for you.
Yeah. And I mean, you know what? In my art practice, I don't have an LLC,
Hmm.
but in Sunlight Tax, I do. And the reason is I made
Yeah.
independent decisions there.
Right.
as an artist, I show through galleries. The gallery has its own insurance. So when my work is there, it's insured. So
Hmm.
I don't have a lot of need for an LLC at my size and with my liability. If I was a dancer or something and people could break their legs performing my works, like I'd for sure have an LLC. So just want to assess your own risk.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful because I just know a lot of artists don't, or a lot of people I talk to feel like they need to have an LLC to like be a business, and you don't, which is
You
really
know,
good to know. But it's also
yeah,
good to know like what you're forfeiting by not having an LLC. So I think that's really helpful.
yeah.
What would you say you see a lot with artists in terms of, or just a lot, I guess, with the people you work with in terms of kind of avoiding the money task? Because I think something I see a lot or that comes up with artists too is not that they can't do it. It's just that maybe they're like, don't want to, I'm going to put it off. So, what do you think
Hmm.
about just kind of like mindset shifts? And this doesn't have to be, some crazy, horrible, hard task. It actually can be something somewhat enjoyable.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm good at teaching this stuff because I'm a little allergic to it myself. So if
Hmm.
I can do it, you can do it. I think a lot of creative people, we develop an allergy to this stuff, partly because we get treated badly, right?
Yeah.
You go to a cocktail party, you're at Thanksgiving dinner, and you say you're an artist, and suddenly people are like, oh, you must be terrible with money. It's like, wait, what? I didn't choose that. Um, but it can be easy if you're feeling like you're about to be disrespected anytime the idea of money comes up, that you start having this like aversion response to it, right?
Yeah.
I worked at a design agency in New York City. Even though he's running a pretty big design agency, he's still a creative person and he still didn't feel like a kinship with accountants. Every time he sat with an accountant, they would treat him like some creative flake. And so he never set up bookkeeping. And this is so simple, but he didn't do it because he didn't like being with accountants. He didn't like how they treated him.
Yeah.
And then his business failed because he didn't have bookkeeping and he couldn't see that he wasn't making enough money. He was spending more than he earned. And so the whole business collapsed. So, like, the cost of this is not theoretical. You can really get hurt from avoiding the money stuff. I just encourage you to think like, your work is valuable. Creative work like moves people. It taps into people's emotion and their desire to be alive and connect with each other. It's wonderful. And I think
Yeah.
just feeling worthy is good.
And I think sometimes actually when you tap into your cash flow and your numbers, it can be beneficial. And I mean, obviously in a lot of ways, but sometimes it's like, wow, I actually moved that much artwork or this, that, and the other. It can be really exciting. I also would
Hmm.
love to talk about how can it help you kind of build a more sustainable long-term career? Because I think something a lot of artists deal with is burnout. And I actually feel like if you can get in your numbers, you're more likely to avoid that. Can you kind of touch
Totally.
on, how just like understanding taxes and cash flow and basic finances can help with that?
Yeah, I so agree with you. Here's what I would say is like one, there's a couple like just money mindset things that I think could be really helpful for people. One, all of us have made money mistakes. You are not your money mistakes of the past, right? You're just a person learning as you go. Nobody gets through their 20s without making some pretty terrible financial decisions. The goal is to not do that again, right? Don't make the same money mistake twice, right? Forgive yourself for what happened in the past. Just start now. That's all you need to do. Treat yourself like your very best friend. Be as good to yourself as that. Improvement over perfection. Just aim to do it better than the last time you did it. And over time, you're going to find you improve. And then the last thing I'll say is give yourself real rewards for small steps. So if sitting down to look at your bank statement feels really difficult, you find that you're avoiding it, you don't want to do a session of bookkeeping, just set yourself some little level, make the space, like play your favorite music, make a nice cup of tea, light a candle, whatever it is that will make that feel a little nice to you, because those positive associations, if you keep them up over time, they actually will make you look forward to that session more. Starting is the hard part. If you just say, okay, I'm going to open up my bank statement, I'm going to look at it for 7 minutes, like, and then reward yourself. You'll
Yeah.
see, like, oh, I didn't die. That wasn't so bad. I could do that again, right? You're kind of just trying to train yourself, like, I can do this.
Yeah.
So, yeah, baby steps, be gentle, be kind to yourself.
I like that. Well, kind of going off of that, for artists who feel a little overwhelmed by taxes right now, just like with the time
Mhm.
of year it is, what is, if you could just say like one simple first step they could take this week to get on track, to get back on track, to get on track, to get started? I mean, however you want to think about it. What is just like bite size? I'm always like, what is like one thing they could do today that would make them feel a little bit better?
It's such a good question. I think it's great. So if you already have a separate bank account, if you don't have a separate bank account, that's your first step. But
Hmm.
if you do have that, then a good first step is to sort last month's transactions into categories, into tax categories. That's what you're doing is bookkeeping. That is bookkeeping. I just want to point out again this visual guide that I made,
Hmm.
that visual guide to your tax deductions. What you do is just set up a spreadsheet. If you're just going to set up your bookkeeping for the very first time, just set it up and take all of these tax categories. You're going to line them up across the top of a spreadsheet, right? These are the categories. And then on the vertical axis, you're just doing each entry in your bank statement, right? So this one is the date. This is the place I spent it, maybe at Michael's or at dickblick.com. And that goes into art supplies. Or this
Yeah.
meal that I had with Haley to talk about her coaching program, like that would be a business meal. And that
Yeah.
goes in that category. So you're just sorting, you're just taking that bank statement and sorting all the transactions into the right category. It's really that simple.
Yeah. I think that's wonderful. What are a few common mistakes that you see artists make tax wise, financially, that are easily avoidable with just some good information?
Yeah. Well, I think one is not realizing or liking the idea that you don't have to report all the income you make from your art. Like if you don't get a 1099, that you don't have to report it. So that's one. That's a mistake. Also, you also have to issue 1099s. That's another important thing to know. So if you paid anyone over $600, you do owe them a 1099, and the deadline for that is January 31st. There are two check boxes you have to affirmatively check on your Schedule C that attest that you have followed the law there. So be very careful. You are on record on a, signed federal document about that. So there's no getting around it. And the penalties start February 1st, daily penalties for not issuing
Can you give an
1099s.
example of what that would be? Because I feel like artists are like, do I owe Michael's a 10? Like, can you give an example of
No,
like
yeah, yeah, yeah.
when we would need to do that?
Yeah, the good news is you do not owe Michael's a 1099. Same. I can't walk in there. It's like actually dangerous. Sorry, my headphone just fell out. So one of the reason that you don't owe Michael's is that if a company is a S corporation or a C corporation, then you don't owe them a 1099. Now, you might be thinking, well, how would I know? Well, you do know that Michael's is traded on stock indexes. I believe it's a public
It's
company.
a
I'm
big
not,
company,
it's a huge
basically.
company. So you can feel good about not owing Michael's. If I'm if I'm joining your coaching program, Haley, and I'm paying you, now that's less clear to me. You could have formed an S corporation. It is possible that I don't owe you in 1099 because you might actually have that tax entity, but I would only know that if I had gotten you to fill out a W-9. And a W-9 is the sort of baseline. Anytime you pay someone, if you ask them to fill out a W-9 for you, you have the backup and the proof that you didn't owe a 1099 to them.
Hmm.
Because if you checked off, for example, if somebody joins my program, I am Sunlight Tax is an S corporation. You do not owe me a 1099 if you pay me
Hmm.
money for my services. But you'd only know that because you got me to fill out a W-9. So basically, anytime you pay somebody, you just, get a blank W-9 off the IRS website. You can say, hey, can you just fill this out? And then that way, if you pay them and they disappear off the face of the earth, which is, it happens, people will move to Spain and you can't find them anymore, then you can still do the paperwork that is required of you by law. So that's sort of a good way to know that you're covered. That was maybe more answer than you wanted on
Yeah.
that.
No, but I think it's helpful, like understanding you would not need to owe Dick Blick, Michaels, but maybe you need to owe the person who's stretching your canvases. Or, I mean,
Yes,
I don't know if
totally.
somebody, you pay someone to do that, but like theoretically, or someone that's like making frames for you that's not a huge framing store.
Totally. And that's a really, those are the typical kind of expenses, like a web designer,
Mhm.
product photographer, like a art photographer that you pay, maybe somebody who does some branding for you. These are people who it's a good idea to check if you're going to owe them a 1099. Those are pretty likely places that you would owe one.
That makes sense. I never thought about that. So that's something I learned and probably something I
Yeah.
need to look into this tax season. Well, this has been wonderful. I could talk to you. I have so many questions personally, so I feel like all the artists listening do, but I think this was really, really helpful. And I know you have so many resources. Can you share all the different ways artists can learn from you? I mean, I know you have a book, you have your website. We touched on a lot of it, but even like where we can buy these things.
Yeah, for sure. Well, sunlighttax.com is where you can find all of this. There's links to the Sunlight Tax podcast there, the Taxes for Humans, which is my book. There's a link to that free visual guide to tax deductions. And also, I'll say this URL because it's not a button on my page, but sunlighttax.com/1099 is where if you're interested in just like a one-off course about how to issue those 1099s, that's a really nice little bite-sized resource. So yeah, sunlighttax.com is basically where you can find it all.
That's great.
And I'd be so happy to come back if you want to have more questions about LLCs or when it is a good idea to form an S corp or specific artist business deductions. We can talk about any of that stuff.
Well, I think we could definitely do a follow-up because I feel like I want to get into all of that. So I know artists would as well, but I feel like this was such a good like starting point, especially around tax season and like where we are and how people can get started. But like you said, improve every year. So we'll do a follow-up episode and maybe get into even more stuff. But
I
this was
love it.
amazing. Thank you so
Good.
much.
So fun to talk to you, Haley. I love what you're doing. You have so many irons in the fire. It's really exciting. And I just can see that you're serving artists really well, which I love.
Well, same to you. And I would love, truly would love to have you on again